Good morning, class. I'm going to do a second part screencast here. For whatever reason, the first screencast was not complete, so I want to put some finishing touches on the Middle and New Kingdoms before we move on tomorrow to sort of a basic sense of the Egyptian worldview, which will be, of course, part of our North Star concern with how ancient civilizations found meaning. And today we address some of the other things, such as how they built an economy, how they built government structures and institutions to help them meet the all-important challenge of how to make decisions, and then of course a little bit about society and how different social groups interacted. Of course, we spent a little time on that yesterday. So here we go, we're at the Middle Kingdom, and as we now know, the Egyptian government having grown, the Egyptian civilization having grown large, and the pharaoh needing to expand his ability to govern, has to enter into essentially a good news, bad news scenario involving the sharing of power. So now he is decentralizing to some degree his rule, sharing it with nomarchs who are scattered throughout the various nomes. Roughly, there are 42 of them as the Middle Kingdom gets underway. This map shows you some of the divisions of the various nomes that are established. Of course, there are not 42 here, so we know that there is a greater number of them all told. But this gives you a little sense of the divisions that start to take shape. We've talked a little bit about the authority and how it changes during the Middle Kingdom, but now we're also going to see the economy of ancient Egypt start to branch out and become something quite a bit more developed than it was during the Old Kingdom. So this period of time, this 2055 to 1650, or I think in the earlier segment I said 2050 to 1650, a 400-year period, gives way to quite a bit of economic development, starting with a merchant class. A merchant class just essentially means a class of traders, those who purchase things locally and then venture abroad or afar to trade those things which tend to be common and abundant locally. They take them to far off places where they are more rare, and of course if something is more rare, it becomes more valuable. So this merchant class is an important part of the economic development, and of course it also means that Egypt is going to come into greater contact with some of its neighbors in the ancient world. So these merchants will trade up and down along the Nile. You could call this domestic trade, meaning trade within Egypt. But they're also going to venture out into the Mediterranean to places like the island of Crete. They're going to venture over here. We can't really see it, but Syria, which is in the eastern Mediterranean, Palestine. Nubia is southern Africa, so as you proceed upriver, which is to say south, you're heading upwards in elevation, there is trade to be had with the ancient Nubians, who are a dark-skinned African people. And there's also going to be some trade along the Red Sea. And so as Egypt and Egyptian merchants come in greater contact, they're going to be finding things like ivory that they can take from the interior of Africa as they trade with the Nubians. They're going to have wood that they can trade, fancy woods, things like cedar that they can trade with their partners to the east. The Egyptians themselves will also secure spices and incense. And at their height, the merchants are going to trade all the way, I'm sort of laughable that I'm taking you off screen here, but all the way over to the islands of Indonesia. And so that is like, imagine sort of past Vietnam, we're talking now all the way across the Indian Ocean. So these Egyptian merchants have some pretty far-flung trade partners. Also, the trade goods that the Egyptians will use tend to be sort of, they tend to be Artistic creations. Your textbook talks a little bit like stone dishes, painted clay boxes. They tend to be somewhat exquisite items that are known for their appearance, their pleasant appearance, their aesthetics. So also gold, silver, copper, furniture. Papyrus paper is a very valuable thing that ancient Egypt was able to produce, which is going to have very useful purposes in terms of driving greater learning and reading and so on and so forth. So the Egyptian economy is developing, and it's developing largely in response to its ability to trade these impressive products. Nonetheless, we talk about economic development, still the lifeblood, the sort of mainstay of the Egyptian economy is going to be the everyday farmer. And the everyday farmer, of course, is critical because they provide the surplus that allows for the economy of Egypt to continue to develop. And these farmers will be working on land that is essentially controlled and owned by the pharaoh, but is designated to various nomarchs and is broken out into various plots so that the people can farm them and can indirectly serve the interests and needs of ancient Egypt and its government. Throughout the throughout the Middle Kingdom, Egyptian foreign involvement remains, it's starting to increase as a result of trade, but we do start to see toward the end of the Middle Kingdom some problems, and actually some foreign invaders take root within Egypt in the latter part of the Middle Kingdom, and ultimately they will take over. In fact, the intermediate period that is created between the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom, okay, it's going to be about 100 years or so, is the result of foreign invaders. We'll call them the Hyksos. The Hyksos are somewhat difficult to pin down historically. Some ancient writers, an ancient Jewish historian by the name of Josephus, put forth the idea that the Hyksos were actually the Israelites, and that the Israelites initially were held in bondage by Egypt, but over time actually took over and became a powerful, briefly controlling force within ancient Egypt. Of course, that's a little bit in contrast to the Old Testament story told in Exodus of Moses delivering the Israelites from captivity and bondage in Egypt. The best historical interpretations are that the term Hyksos just refers to foreign invaders, that they were here for a brief period of time, that they controlled that intermediate period, but that ultimately a revolt of Egyptians took place at the end of that intermediate period and expelled these foreign invaders. But we start to see for the first time Egypt coming into conflict and having real difficulties with some outsiders and some foreign elements. So the Middle Kingdom comes to a conclusion largely as a result of that foreign interference. But the New Kingdom is, by 1550, once again, Egypt is in the hands of Egyptians, and the pharaohs of the New Kingdom are native Egyptian rulers. The historical understanding is that when the Hyksos invaded for that intermediate period between the Middle and New Kingdoms, that they brought with them certain military technology, as the textbook says, that they brought iron chariot, horse and chariot platforms for fighting. And the Egyptians are going to essentially absorb this technology. They're going to absorb this ability from these outsiders, and that is part of the story of how they reassert themselves and reclaim Egypt for the New Kingdom. And after this, the lesson is not going to be lost. The Egyptians are going to take this skill, this technology, adapted for their own benefits. And we will now enter into a uniquely militaristic period in Egyptian history. So the Egyptians during the New Kingdom will undertake military campaigns in an effort to subdue and expand Egypt into surrounding areas. And that's going to work quite well for a time. They're going to create an empire throughout the Middle East. This is going to bring new wealth and power to the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, and it's going to create quite a bit of respect for Egypt in the area surrounding Egypt, places like Syria, Palestine, various places throughout the Mediterranean Sea. And so this will be essentially a last and powerful assertion of Egyptian power. Ultimately, the New Kingdom will come to an end by 1070 BCE, and it will come to an end at the hands of neighbors who ultimately take over parts of Egypt from the south, from the north, so on and so forth. But as we look at this, the authority, there's a really interesting chapter in the New Kingdom, and I think it's really important for us to understand. There's an experiment undertaken by one of the New Kingdom pharaohs, and his name is Akhenaten. And Akhenaten, his name, as the textbook discusses, it means it is well with Aten. And what Akhenaten undertakes is a unique religious experiment in all of Egyptian history, where he briefly tries to transform Egypt and Egyptian civilization from a polytheistic belief in multiple gods to a singular commitment to one God, and that God is Aten. And if you think about this, this is about the same time. We haven't really gone there yet because we'll be looking at this a little bit later this week. But this is about the same time that the Israelites, or Abraham, is undertaking a similar monotheistic experiment. So what works for the ancient Hebrews under Abraham, where they turn from a polytheistic to a monotheistic worldview, a belief and an endorsement of a single God, that same effort, or a similar effort, undertaken in Egypt is going to be an utter failure. So Akhenaten tries to transform Egyptian society, and this does not go over so well. And if you think about it, there are a number of priests, the priestly class, which is a powerful class of ancient Egyptian society. They, of course, are going to fight Akhenaten every step of the way, because what Akhenaten is proposing is that the priests are no longer necessary because they do not practice a commitment to a single God. They practice a commitment to many gods, and the types of ceremonies and the types of lessons and learning are no longer important because Akhenaten is trying to change Egypt. This does not go over very well, and as a result, Akhenaten is going to be driven out. His changes will be undone by King Tutankhamun, which is worth noting because King Tutankhamun is our King Tut, and he is a famous pharaoh in Egyptian history, really only because we've discovered his ruins and we have a fairly intimate understanding of King Tut. But beyond that, he's not a terribly noteworthy pharaoh, other than that he undoes much of what Akhenaten put forth in the mid-14th century BCE. So I will close. I will just say that economically, if I back up here a little bit, the pharaoh Hatshepsut, which is actually a female pharaoh, she is noteworthy in the sense that she can be credited with lively military campaigns, and also she accomplishes quite a bit in the way of trade, trying to expand Egypt's control over neighboring areas, which helps Egypt's economy considerably. So with that, I will stop, and I'll look forward to meeting with you tomorrow to discuss some of the cultural changes in world belief systems that start to happen in Egypt as well.